Today I will do a tutorial showing my little finishing tips and tricks for my Musselburgh or Musselburgh hat. In this video I'm going to talk about how to measure the hat, a simplified way to do the decreases, how to weave in the original end from the first video that I did, and how to finish the very tip of the hat when you are done. So let's get started. Just to introduce myself, my name is Margaret, and this is my Wonderful Knitting Life YouTube channel. If you are interested in the first and second video of the tips for doing the Musselburgh or Musselburgh the easy way, you can check out my channel. I've made two videos, the first one in being how to complete the start of the hat in an easier way, how to do the increases. The second video is about how to measure your gauge and how to read the chart for the increases. So today's video, the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to measure your Musselburgh hat. So as you can see from the top of the crown, because this is knit to be round or circular for your head, if I lay it on one side, it's very difficult to measure because it's kind of curling over. So a little trick that I have discovered in just playing with this is that if you fold it in half while you're trying to measure it, that whole problem becomes non-existent. And now it is really simple for me to pull out my measuring tape and just measure down my hat to the point at which the pattern tells me to. Now I have to be honest because with my hats, I like to make them a little bit longer than Isolde Teague does for this pattern because I like the brim to be a little bit bigger. I live in Canada and we get cold days in our winter, and that 4-layer brim really comes in handy. So I usually do about a ½ inch to an inch longer than recommended in order to extend that brim. The next thing I'm going to show you is how I decrease for the crown. I've already started decrease, as you can see in this one section right here. Isolde Teague has a system which is really common in hat patterns and also in making socks for the gusset, where you do a slip-slip knit on one side and a knit two together on the other side of your section. However, I have a really hard time remembering which side I'm doing the slip-slip knit on, and I'm not a big fan of the slip-slip knit because it doesn't really mirror the knit two together. It's not the same combination of stitches. So I've come up with a different way of doing this, and I'm going to show you that. I think it's a little bit easier to remember as well. I will show you how to do this both continental style and English style as I do both. I'm going to start with the continental style here. So what I like to do is just start off with my regular knit one. And what I'm going to do instead of that slip-slip knit is I am going to knit two through the back loops of my stitches. I like to say I'm knitting through the back door. So I'm decreasing. Then I'm going to knit the whole way across or go through my house. I used to be a teacher, so I came up with all of these little memory things, and I still tend to do that with most things that I do. So I knit two through the back door. I'm knitting across my section, and remember we have 4 sections of the crown. There's my stitch marker separating my 2 sections, and I'm going to knit to the last 3 stitches, and I'm going to leave my house through the front door, which means I'm knitting through the front of those 2 stitches. And then I have 1 left to knit at the end of that section. So if I switch over and show you that using my English style knitting. I'll switch my yarn to the other hand. I'm going to start with knitting 1. And then I'm going to again knit 2 through the back door. I'm going to come in my house through the back door. And then I'm going to knit across. And while I'm knitting across, I'm just going to mention that if you find this helpful, this tutorial helpful, or you're enjoying other content of my channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps support the work that I'm doing here. All right, so I'm heading towards the front door of my house as I leave this row. And what I'm going to do is, having some yarn management issues here. I am now going to knit through the front 2 as I leave my house. I'm going through the front door. And for me, that is the easiest way. I like the way it looks. There's my, right there, my 2 knitted through the back, and you can see that it's leaning towards the center, and then at the end, my knit 2 together is doing the same thing. They're both kind of looking at each other. All right, so that was my second tip. So the third thing I want to say is before you do all of your, let me just go back here. Before you do all of your decreases, you want to stop and go back and weave in any ends that you have and finish dealing with the little hole that we have at the crown. The reason we have that little hole is simply because in the part 1 of this series, I showed a much simpler way to cast on this hat, which I wanted to do for my nephew, who is a beginner knitter, but he is becoming a more adventurous knitter. So you're going to need some kind of tapestry needle. This one is a fairly dull-ended tapestry needle, or a yarn needle, and it's got a good gap in the front. I picked this one up at Walmart, I think. It has a bend in it, and I kind of like those when I'm sewing things in. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to reach into my hat and grab the end and pull it through. So I am now taking a look at the crown of my hat right here, where we have that little hole from the beginning. I've got a knot right here in my yarn because when I started, I explained that I always do that with my tail so I don't accidentally end up knitting it for a few stitches. And yes, I still do that sometimes, even though I've been knitting my whole life. These things are easy to do. So I'm going to thread that needle. I'm going to stick my hand inside the hat because I want to be able to hold that as best I can. Sorry for the scraping there because my needles are kind of dragging. So basically what we're going to do is we're just kind of sew in the end, but at the same time, we're going to be filling that hole in. So to start off, I'm just going to be catching some little loops as I go around in that circle. And I'm going to go from there. So I'm just catching a couple of loops very close to the center. And that's going to help draw it in a little bit. As you can see, it's already starting to be drawn in. I'm going to catch another one right here. So I'm just going through the base of those purl bumps as I go around my circle. And I've pretty much almost completely closed that in now when I pull on that yarn. See, it's almost disappeared. And then I also want to make sure that I bury that yarn tail a little bit. So I am just going to have a little adventure here. I'm going to go through some more purl bumps as I finish up. It's very personal how you weave in your yarns. There's no perfect method. I just like to grab a few of these purl bumps and not always in the same direction. That way, when my hat gets pulled, I'll catch this one right here, my tail isn't going to pop out anywhere. So I'm gonna go back up this way. So I'm kind of alternating directions a little bit. I'm gonna go up this way. Then I'm gonna come down this way. And this is superwash yarn. So when it's non-superwash, you don't have to quite do this as much as you would with your superwash because this is a little bit slippery. So it would be more apt to slide out if I were not being careful. I'm going to go down here. And just a few more just to double secure them. And then when I'm done, what I often do is I kind of go through one more than once, very gently, because I don't really want to pull that stitch. And then I'll just run through a couple more before I'm completely happy with that. And then I'm going to clip it. But I don't actually clip my ends right next to them. I give them maybe a centimeter. Nobody's going to be looking on the inside of that hat. And if this slides at all, that's just going to hold it really nicely, gives it a little extra space. All right, let's go take a look at the other side now and see how that finished it off. There we go. So as you can see now, there's no hole at the top of the crown of my hat. And when I soak that, it's going to relax nicely. And to be honest with you, nobody really looks at the top of your hat. I'm very tall, so even less for me. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to finish the rest of my decreases, and then I'm going to come back and show you how I deal with the very end finishing part of my hat. So I'll be back in a bit. All right, I am back. I have done all of my decreases now, except for the last round of decreases. I have got 4 stitches in each section. So I have a total of 16 stitches at this point. So I can no longer have gap stitches between the middle when I'm decreasing. If you're wondering what this white light bulb marker is, that is the beginning of my round. And I'm going to take that off now because I don't really need to remind myself where I am being so close here to the end. So in order to finish this off, I am going to knit the first 2 stitches through the back loops. I am going to knit the last 2 of each section. It gets a little tricky and tight towards the end. There we go. Through the front, I'm going to go through the back. And I'm going to go through the front. Everything's a little bit tight at this point. I've got my 4 stitches here. I'm going to reorientate myself so that my working yarn is at the back stitch like this. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to cut this and I'm going to give myself a tail. Oh, what would that be? About 6-8 inches long. And I am now going to thread my needle with that yarn end. And that yarn is attached to the back needle. So it's really important that I now stitch through all of the stitches starting with the front needle, or I'm going to find that it's going to unwind itself a little bit. So I'm just going to go around slipping that purl ways, taking off my stitch markers as I go the whole way around. So that's the front stitch off. And I'm going to keep going. And pull that through. I am going to go through the back stitches. Now this one is a little trickier because I can't just go through the front like I did before. I'm going to be going through all of these stitches but from the other end of my needle. But I do need to go in that round shape. I'm going to make sure I don't go through that light bulb stitch marker because I'm going to take that off. All right, I'm through all 8. I'm going to pull that off. Stitch marker is gone, and I'm going to snug that up. And there's the crown of my hat. Now, this is at the front of my hat, and I need to bury that inside of my hat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back down through the middle of my hat, and this is where we kind of have to imagine what's happening on the inside of the hat. I am going to run that through a tiny bit on the inside of the hat. Now, Isolde Teague, she shows what she does with hers. What I'm going to do is probably more like a duplicate stitch just to solidify this. I've come through the middle bottom of a stitch, and I am going to sew through the stitch above like this. And then I am going to go back down and come up at the base of a stitch a couple below. So I've just re-knit or re-sewn that stitch so it doesn't look like I've done anything with it. Now I'm at the bottom of a stitch again, and I'm going to run my needle through the stitch above both legs. And then I'm going to return down the center bottom of that stitch where the yarn came up. At the same time, I want to make sure I'm not sewing my needle to the back anywhere. That would be a problem. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go down 2 stitches from where my needle is, and I'm going to come through the base of that stitch. And then I'm going to go 1 stitch above it and put my needle through the 2 legs. And I'm going to return back to the base of that stitch. And then I am going to just kind of run this a little ways and pull it up. I'm going to snug that in. So I've duplicate stitched 3. I'm going to clip that so it hides itself into the hat. And there we go. My hat is now complete. A lot of people like to block it at this stage, but I'm kind of excited to see what mine's going to look like. So I'm going to fold one side into the other, kind of give it a little bit of stretching and even it up a little bit. Oh, this is kind of exciting to see what it's going to look like here. And then I'm going to turn it up, and then you kind of get the idea of where it's heading. So there's my brim, there's my cute little stripes. I do need to do a little bit more adjusting here in order to get it the way I want it to be, but you get the idea here of what that final look is going to be with the brim. So I hope that you found those little tips and tricks helpful. This is actually going to be a Christmas gift for my daughter. It matches a cowl that I made her a couple of years ago. So I'm going to soak it, I'm going to block it, and then fold it nicely so that she can have a nice new hat to open for Christmas. And there we go. So I hope that that has been somewhat helpful for you to make your Musselburgh or Musselburgh hat. And if you enjoyed this video, please check out my other content. And if you would like and subscribe, that would be wonderful. Wishing you all the best. Happy knitting, everybody.